So I decided it was time to do an entry in my Nevermore note series that includes something a little bit more pop, widely read, which is why we're going to break down everything that has to do with One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. And because this is going to be a rather long series, we're going to start with part 1, the cards today. The infection comes as a fever in the night. If you take ill, watch the veins, the tributary of blood traveling down the arms. If they remain as they ever did, you have nothing to fear. If the blood darkens to an inky black, the infection has taken hold. The infection comes as a fever in the night. One Dark Window, Chapter 1, Epigraph. So it's no secret on this channel, I find epigraphs really lazy world building. It removes readers from the action, presumably to tell me something the writer could have shown me in actions or gestures or some kind of societal element. But I am trying to get over my own biases and promising to do better, so in this review, I am going to include every single epigraph. And we're going to see if it adds more than it takes away. Starting with this first epigraph, I think it does a good job priming the reader. Going forward, I'm going to personally make note of medical jargon and what exactly happens to these people with the fever. And from that epigraph, we roll right into a flashback. The physicians are coming. We're led to believe that's not a very good thing. Elspeth's aunt Opal wakes her up and shoves her out a window, telling her to run. On the way down, Elspeth hits her head, and naturally from that blow, she is woozy and struggling. She doesn't think she's going to be able to make it to the forest. She's worried about that. A male voice that's in her head tells her she is going to make it. And that's the last thing she remembers before she passes out. When she wakes up, she's in the forest, so presumably that male voice took over her body when she passed out and got her to safety. I am also not a big fan of non-linear storytelling, so having like a flashback at the beginning of chapter 1 right after an epigraph is dangerous business. And I think why this works here is because fantasy stories usually have a lot of world building they have to do. Starting us off with an exposition scene that builds tension, gets us excited for those moments where the exposition will reveal what's going on and why this is important. So stuff I'm going to keep track of based off of this flashback is what is going on with the capital P physicians. And what's the deal with that male voice in her head that she is calling the nightmare? And things I didn't mention in the summary, but I am curious about going forward include: what's up with the mist? And what's the mention of this charm that Elspeth checks for before she runs into the woods? But finally moving into the actual story, starting with where are we? We are in a town called Blunder. It's a medievalish times town that's sort of like surrounded by a huge forest. They have cobblestone walkways and like open market stalls and, you know, all that kind of generic fantasy paraphernalia. Elspeth specifically lives further inside the forest with her Aunt Opal, while her father lives in town with her stepmother and 2 stepsisters. The king's castle is also in this town, and it is a place called Stone. Further context for this world is that magic is real but generally forbidden. This fever plague thing we were talking about in the epigraph is actually what causes the magic, and the physicians with the capital P are here to like root out the fever and stop people from having this illegal magic. They also send out the king's guard called Destroyers to capture anyone who happens to gain this illegal magic through a fever. Introducing us to Providence cards, which are the one and only legal form of magic. There are 12 different major arcana cards that do different things, but there are multiple copies of an individual card. So for example, there are 2 nightmare cards in the deck. Using the Providence cards is easy. You tap it 3 times and that activates whatever its ability is, but you do have to be careful because using it too long leads to some kind of magical backlash. And here we're going to meet our main protagonist, Elspeth. She got sick with the infection. Her aunt took her in illegally and hid her while she was recovering. After she's cured, the aunt claims that she got through the fever magic free to the rest of her family, and I guess they warily accept that. Here in the first chapter, Elspeth cryptically alludes to the fact that she might have magic, or probably does have magic, and it's unclear if anyone else suspects yet. We also meet Ione, who is Elspeth's cousin. She has brothers, and she's generally pretty honest and open. She wears her heart on her sleeve and is set up to be Elspeth's foil in this story. Now, what is a foil? That specifically is a character that exists to contrast traits traits from one character to the other. Often these characters have an in-story connection, like being family members, as is the case between Elspeth and Ione, but it's also common that they're like rivals. And occasionally you'll see this connection between a hero and a villain as well. A foil is meant specifically to contrast traits, but it doesn't necessarily make any moral statement about a character acting one way versus a character acting the other way, even though like a hero villain foil inevitably leads to that contrast. But just try to remember that a foil is meant to exaggerate the traits of one character compared to another and how they approach things so differently, and ideally it gets you asking what if. Is one character better suited to deal with the plot than another character? Can we identify these characters' two different approaches? If the characters are both raised in similar situations, what exactly was the inciting incident that made them be so opposite to each other? And for Elspeth, exactly how disconnected is Elspeth from the rest of her family? Why has she developed such a good poker face in comparison to Ione? And do these traits serve Elspeth's larger goals? Do these characteristics make Elspeth different from the rest of her society? Or is Ione the standout character here? We also get to meet Aunt Opal, who is Elspeth's mother's sister. She loves Elspeth enough that she broke the law regarding kids who get fevers and hid her from both the physicians and the desk dryers. And it's worth noting she had enough control over her own household to get this done, even though everyone else in the home knew Elspeth was sick. We also meet Balin, who is a steward in Elspeth's father's home. He's apparently wary of her like most of the staff has become. So it looks to me like Elspeth comes from a wealthy family. I don't know if that matters at all. We also get to meet Narum, who's Elspeth's stepmother. She doesn't like Elspeth, and she's trying to undermine her relationship with her father. I did note here that this is like a slightly ageist trope in my personal opinion, because the stepmother is described as someone who doesn't smile and has white hair, which indicates that she is older. And she's also playing the stereotypical evil stepmother trope, but like, why? It's possible all of this will get subverted later, either by the stepmother being like secretly good or for the stepmother having good reason to feel the way she does with Elspeth. But currently this specific part of the plot as presented to me feels a little contrived and off-putting, and I am hoping against hope there'll be some kind of subversion later on. We also get to meet Naya and Dima, who are Elspeth's twin stepsisters. Elspeth says that they hate her, but both of them feel pretty vaguely polite and like overly curious about her. Generally speaking, when they're all in the room together, it seemed like the stepsisters have been trained to ignore her. And at this point in the summary, they're not really characters yet, but I'm marking them down in case they play something along the line in the plot. The twins happen to talk about Prince Hoth. It seems that they saw him last equinox. He has at least one Providence card we know of, which is going to be the chalice, and this is something that creates liquid people can drink to get truth serum from. It looks like he's a bit of a troublemaker who does whatever he wants, and also he's next in line for the crown. We also get to hear about this other character, Just For You. She is a woman dress trier, and as far as I know, she's the only female soldier in the book. She doesn't like the mischief Prince Hoth does, and other than that, we don't know anything about this chick. We get to meet Eric Spindle, who's Elspeth's father. He was the captain of the dress triers at one point in time. He owns a well card that he inherited from Elspeth's mother, and Elspeth personally believes he abandoned her when she was sick and has never fought for her since then. We also get to hear about Alex Labradum. This is a guy Elspeth met at Solstice when she was 17. She kissed him, and he has been smitten with her ever since. Although he hasn't talked to Elspeth, he's been annoying apparently stepmother Narum and Aunt Opal, trying to like get a hold of her. And as you can tell, I don't think much of this character. The dog illustration should be all you need to know about what I think this guy's purpose is. He's got kicked but still loyal puppy written all over that face. We also meet the Nightmare, who is a voice in Elspeth's head. He can see magic like the Providence cards, and because of that, Elspeth can also see it as different colors of light. Maybe he has prophetic abilities, I don't know. He speaks to her in riddles and rhymes and seems to have foreknowledge or like additional information that she lacks. He also has a whole culture and like set of songs and stuff that are completely different from what Elspeth knows. Moving us into chapter 2. Nothing is free, nothing is safe. Magic is love, but also it's hate. It comes at a cost, you're found and you're lost. Magic is love, but also it's hate. So notice here the epigraph seems to change both format and tone, taking on a centered, specifically poetic rhyme scheme and like stanza sort of format. And the sing-song fairy tale nature of it makes me wonder if this could be a fae angle. So I'm asking, who's writing these epigraphs? Will it turn out to be like an altering conversation? How does this epigraph about magic connect to an epigraph about the fever? Rolling us right into our next flashback, where Eric rips Elspeth from her childhood home the moment she gets the fever. After the fever breaks, everyone at Aunt Opal's home is on eggshells waiting for her magic to appear, but the silence goes on long enough that even Elspeth begins to hope. Then one day, the uncle secures the nightmare card by killing a bunch of highwaymen. The nightmare's power allows people to speak directly into somebody else's mind. If you use it too long, the card reveals your deepest fears. So Elspeth is an incredibly curious child, and she sneaks in at night to the library to get a better look at the card. She touches it and feels a sharp jolt run through her, and the voice of the nightmare has been in her head ever since. Obviously, Elspeth believes that this is a manifestation of her magic from the fever, but she also believes that this voice is somehow like the spirit of the nightmare card, or literally the monster depicted on the nightmare card, and it's speaking to her and seeing through her eyes. Why doesn't Eric ever retrieve his daughter after the fever breaks? Elspeth kind of glosses over her father's abandonment here, even though I'm stuck on it, and it kind of makes sense for him to hide her while she's sick, especially as the captain of the dress dryers. It makes a lot less sense for him not to welcome her back home, especially as Elspeth frames living with her aunt and uncle as an incredible act of love and loyalty from them that she is forever grateful for. Also, there's this mention of this lady Jendiah, who's apparently the master of arms for Elspeth's uncle. We also get to meet Tiernan Hawthorne. This is Elspeth's uncle and Aunt Opal's husband. He's head of the Hawthorne home where Elspeth lives. We also get a little nightmare lore in here. This all started when Elspeth touched the nightmare card, not after she got the fever. So the nightmare's been living in Elspeth's head for 11 years, and if Elspeth asks the nightmare for help, he can make her faster or stronger. So this left me with a ton of questions, obviously, like, does the uncle's nightmare card still work, or did Elspeth like somehow absorb the spirit and the power within that card? Would Elspeth absorb another Providence card if she touched that? Can Elspeth absorb more than one card at a time? Are there other people who have magic like hers? When the nightmare is making her stronger or faster, is that Elspeth using magic, or is that the nightmare using magic? This seems like it would be really important if magic comes with a price, because who has to pay that price comes into play at that juncture. Was it even Elspeth using magic to get the nightmare in her head, or is something else going on here? Nara makes Elspeth feel unwelcome at her father's home, so she decides to head back to her uncle's house alone through the woods at night. Highwaymen ambush her. She mentally reaches out to the nightmare because she's scared and panicking. The highwaymen ask who she is. Nightmare tells her to lie, and she does. Men want to know where her uncle keeps his Providence cards. She refuses. They search her. Nightmare really wants to be let out because he wants to kill these fools, but Elspeth waits. And then the men go to search her arms and pull up her sleeves, and Elspeth freaks out. She lets the nightmare take over. He incapacitates these highwaymen and then like outruns them back to the house. And when they get back to Uncle Turn's home, that's when he turns all of her body back over to her. And that's when we get a Providence card fact. Stealing a Providence card is a capital offense. Which makes me ask, when Uncle Turn took the nightmare card from the highwaymen, is that considered stealing, or is that okay because highwaymen is like an illegal offense and we assume they stole it from someone too? We also get a little bit of an Elspeth update. She's really sensitive about her arms because when she's using the nightmare's power, they turn inky black and it reveals that she has magic to everyone. So remember I said I was looking out for what Elspeth's charm is and what it does? We get that question answered! Elspeth's charm is specifically a crow's foot. I still have no idea why people have charms or what her charm means. And we also get a nightmare lore drop. Whatever he is, he's been around for 500 years. So please, 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 Nightmare, do not turn into the love interest. Rolling us into the Chapter 3 epigraph. I was born with the fever, my blood dark as night, with magic unflinching, power and might. My sights, they were endless, my ambition too vast. So I asked for more blessings, for power amassed. The spirit did warn me that nothing comes free. The bargains and barters all come with a fee. Though payment was dear, I paid what it cost, with blood and with bones and parts of me lost. So mind how you use them and keep up your guard. 12 blessings, 12 curses, 12 Providence cards. So remember I was asking who writes these epigraphs and whether or not we're going to get like an alternating conversation, which I personally thought would have been cool, short, and simple. The poems are from an in-universe lore book that I guess everyone reads. The epigraph we got in chapter 1 I think might also be from that book. We are not going to get a back and forth conversation in these epigraphs, much to my disappointment. I also asked how the epigraph about magic connected to the epigraph about the fever, and that is answered too. The fever gives magic. Black blood means someone's using magic. There's always a grave cost, and the results are unpredictable, leading me to wonder if the nightmare is the creator of the Providence cards. So the next morning, all the Hawthorns are sitting around the table, and we find out that they too were invited to Stone for the equinox. Ione really wants to go, but Aunt Opal says that they still owe money on taxes, so maybe they can't. And Uncle Tern says not to worry because he's going to use the nightmare card to pay their taxes off, which is sort of suspicious. Elspeth mentions she feels Uncle Tern is being suspicious because of his tone and vague answers. But like, I don't know the guy that well, I don't know how common this is, and it felt pretty normal to me. I think the bigger issue here is that Uncle Tern acquired this nightmare card 11 years ago, and Aunt Opal knows nothing about it till right now. Which again has me asking, did Uncle Tern come across the nightmare card legally? Rolling us into some fun Providence card facts. They cannot be destroyed, no matter what you do to them. And this dude called Shepherd King made the cards, which I guess that's why this is his series. Rolling us into the legend of Shepherd King. According to Aunt Opal, the spirit of the woods blessed Shepherd King with magic, and according to Uncle Tern, he was cursed with magic, showing the disparity in belief about whether magic is good or evil. But Shepherd King specifically used his magic to create the Providence cards and bring a safe form of magic to the people. And every single card required a sacrifice made to the spirit of the woods to create it. The Nightmare says, what he wrote, what he did, was all done for naught. His cards are about weapons, his kingdom now cruel, shepherd of folly, king of fools. From chapter 3 of One Dark Window. Leading us into Spirit of the Woods, it turns out this being is like a deity in the world of Blunder. She smells like salt, and all magic gives off a salt smell. And everybody in this world has a tree surname specifically to honor the Spirit of the Woods, but people stopped worshipping her after the Providence cards were made because the Providence cards are a safer form of magic than like the unpredictable, wild thing that Spirit of the Woods offers. Spirit of the Woods did not appreciate that, and she retaliates by cursing Blunder with mist. And you guys might remember I was wondering what's up with the mist. Well, that here is answered. The mist is a force that cuts Blunder off from neighboring lands. It lures people into the woods to die. Apparently, it's responsible for infecting children with the fever that causes magic. It gets more severe and spreads farther every year. You guys might also remember I wanted to know more about charms, and we're getting a further update right here. Every person in Blunder keeps a charm. It wards off the effect of the mist. Holding one is literally the only thing keeping the mist from luring you out in the forest. And it's also supposed to keep the infection at bay. And we get some pandemic lore unlocked here too. So the magic that comes from this fever is uncontrolled. What it takes from people who use it could be like a physical attribute or their sanity, but either way it's called degeneration, and it is slowly killing these people. So once you get this fever, you're never really well again, which is why Shepherd King attempted to remove the mist. He went to the Spirit of the Woods to learn how to get rid of the mist, and he prints the solution in his book about the Providence cards, but he was unable to personally rid Blunder of the mist because he needed all 12 of these cards to actually do it, and he had just traded away the Twin Alders card. And the poem for the cure of the mist goes like this. The 12 call for each other when the shadows grow long, when the dates are cut short and the spirit is strong. They call for the deck and the deck calls them back. Unite us, they say, and we'll cast out the black. At the king's namesake tree, with the black blood of salt, all 12 shall together bring the sickness to halt. They'll lighten the mist from mountain to sea, new beginnings, new ends. Nothing comes free. So this is a poem and it takes its own sort of poetic license, but based off of this, I can assume that we need all 12 of the Providence card. Someone who's infected with the fever, magic based off of the claim for salt scent, though I think maybe someone infected with the fever, black blood, also qualifies as magic. And not part of this poem, but randomly it's pretty clear people assume the king is the one who needs to cure this disease. And that leaves me wondering, did Shepherd King rule Blunder? This is also where we talk a little bit about King Rowan. Obviously he's the king of Blunder, he lives in stone. Seems like he has a pretty large family, and he really wants that tax money even though it hasn't been a very good year for Blunder. Also we meet Lynn and Aldrich, and these are Ion's brothers, or Elspeth's younger cousins. They don't seem like important characters, but they're here. So after lunch, Elspeth follows Opal out to the garden to talk to her. She tells her she does not want to go to Equinox, and her aunt wants her to go partially to spite her stepmother. She hints that Alex is still asking after her and she could see him again. And reluctantly, Elspeth decides she will go to Solstice after all. So that night, as Elspeth dreams, she catches the nightmare unaware, and she sees a man standing in golden armor. When the nightmare notices her, he takes control of the dream and transforms their surroundings. The man in armor transforms into the nightmare creature, and they go from being in a field to being in the library where Elspeth first touched the nightmare card. So Elspeth asks the nightmare who that knight was, which makes me think, is Elspeth dense or is she testing the nightmare? And nightmare implies that it doesn't matter because the knight's dead. Tells her a poem about Shepherd King meeting a girl, and both of them get consumed in Shepherd's pursuit of the Providence cards. Could this girl be the spirit of the woods? And could the nightmare be Shepherd King? Leading us into chapter 4 epigraph. Magic smells of salt. Like ocean tides, it carries great balance. It wraps itself around the spirit of the wood, good and evil, love and hate, life and death. Can you smell it in the mist? In the cards? In your own house? Magic smells of salt. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I have really been trying to embrace the epigraph lifestyle. But I cannot do that for this. The magic smells like salt bit has been mentioned several times, and putting it up front here in chapter 4 feels random instead of like cohesive, purposeful world building. But if I really had to stretch and push myself, I do think it's interesting magic smells like salt, because salting the earth poisons the ground. You have to wonder if magic is as toxic to spirit of the woods as it appears it can be to humans. And it still has me questioning about the possibility of a fae connection here, because salt has a lot of folkloric connections to the fae. In some places, salt is used to protect people from the fae, and in other places you can like throw salt at a fae and they have to stop coming at you to count every single grain before they can continue their pursuit. So it feels like there could be connections there too. Also, this magic feels ruthless like fae bargains. It gives a person what they want for a cost that's way higher than anticipated. So it just has me wondering if fae will be part of the story, if magic is secretly toxic to both humanity and spirit of the woods. We also get some more Providence card facts. There are 78 Providence cards total, and they are divided as 12 black horses, 1 for each Death's Trier, 11 golden eggs, 10 prophets, 9 white eagles, 8 maidens, 7 chalices, 6 wells, 5 iron gate, 4 sides, 3 mirrors, 2 nightmares, and 1 twin alder. So Elspeth and Ione are walking towards Stone for the equinox, and Ione thinks that her father Taryn will give the king the nightmare card in return for her betrothal to one of the princes, ideally Prince Hoth. And arguing ensues here because Elspeth thinks that Hoth is a bad dude. Ione scolds her. They say that neither one of them knows Hoth at all, and they should hope that he's a good and moral prince. And if he's not that, maybe he's reasonable. Maybe someone like Ione could soften his heart. Elspeth basically says Ione is way too innocent and optimistic. She says Hoth and the whole Rowan line cannot be trusted, and Ione kind of gets big mad and storms off ahead of Elspeth. So since Elspeth and Ione are foils, we should dig in anytime they disagree. Their difference in opinion here spans a few things: whether the prince is a good person and whether or not they can trust him, whether the Rowans want what's best for Blunder or simply what's best for themselves, and whether a single average person can make a difference or not. A couple predictions I have: I am assuming that Hoth is a bad person, even though we have no evidence of that right now. I'm also low-key hoping that Ione is way more capable than Elspeth is giving her credit for. I also think that the why one would or would not want to stop the mist is probably going to matter here. And I think this story will prove a single person can make a difference. And I'm hoping that we'll get to see this both through Ione and Elspeth as their paths diverge here. Rolling us into the equinox festivities, Elspeth finally gets to the Stone Palace and meets up with her father. She agrees to stay with them for the celebration. And then she immediately runs into Alex, who is definitely smitten a whole 2 years later after that kiss and wants to hang out with Elspeth. But Elspeth breaks away from him and decides to sit down with some random people. And at first, this younger person seems like a new interested suitor entering the ring, which is how we meet Emory. He's a cousin of King Rowan, he's unreasonably clingy to Elspeth, and something feels a little bit off about him even though he is being really kind to Elspeth. We also meet Renelm. This is the second-born son of the king. He's sitting next to Emory, and it seems like he is there specifically to watch over Emory at some capacity. So Elspeth is overwhelmed by all the different colored light coming from all the Providence cards. This leads her to drinking a little too much wine. So she can't handle the lights from the cards, the slight drunk she has from the wine, and all of Emory's questions, and she gets up to leave. Emory accompanies her out of the main ballroom. And Elspeth really wants to be alone, but Emory keeps encouraging her to stay. He touches her hand as if to stop her departure, and that's kind of when all hell breaks loose. Maybe he's seeing some of Elspeth's future. We don't really know. At this point in time, we can say that he accurately describes the nightmare as a creature that's standing next to Elspeth, which gives us a nightmare update where he is apparently a creature separate from Elspeth that's discernible and one can see in her head. So this freaks Elspeth out and she slaps Emory trying to get away from him. She's about to call the nightmare for help when an all-black clad figure comes out of the shadows and tackles Emory away from her. And this is where we get to meet Raven Yu, who happens to be Emory's brother. He's also the current captain of the Destroyers, and he somehow manages to balance being both apologetic to Elspeth and standoffish. Because he does apologize for his brother's outburst and check to see if Elspeth is alright, and then he immediately rolls into interrogation mode. First he wants to know why she doesn't live with her family, then he walks her back to her family's rooms, I guess because he feels like she's suspicious. But Raven is not the only suspicious person here, because Elspeth takes note that Raven has these Providence cards and she didn't see those color light anywhere in the ballroom, which means he was nowhere near her when Emory started to go off. But he somehow knew that there was a problem and where to find them. Seems to her like this captain of the Destroyers has his own secrets. Leading us off with chapter 5, starting with an epigraph about the maiden. Be wary the pink, be wary the rose. Be wary of beauty divine, unopposed. Her thorns will grow sharp, she'll eat her own heart. Be wary the beauty divine, unopposed. And I am incredibly unimpressed with this little poem. We do see the maiden card here at play to give me a generic, not everything is as it seems kind of moment. I'm hoping we luck out and get a vicious femme fatale out of the chapter, but I do think that we're beginning to see the downside of more poetic prose because it lacks a lot of clarity and this current usage is quite jarring from the way the rest of the story gets told. It personally feels to me like maintaining this rhyme scheme became a burden for the author. So the next morning, Elspeth wakes up and her two stepsisters are staring her down, and they want to know all about Emory. Somehow Elspeth turns this around on them and she finds out about Emory, confirming that he frequently says weird things. He's known for being sick and being a drunk, and he lives at the palace full time now so the royals can keep him under control using one of their scythe cards, which is a scythe card lore drop. Only royal possess them and they can control any one person. Also worth noting that this is a similarity between Emory and Elspeth, which makes Raven's questioning feel a little bit more empathetic. But it also makes Raven a lot more dangerous to Elspeth because her situation and Emory's situation is a lot more similar than she would like Raven to ever find out. Also, I've kind of got to ask, do the sisters hate Elspeth or not? To me, these sisters seem a lot more curious than wary, and it has me wondering if Elspeth just feels robbed of a closer sibling relationship like she observes between Ione Iowyn and her brothers? And if that's the case, then say that. Also, maybe take a moment and show me the bond between Iowyn and her brothers. So all the ladies are gonna walk in the palace gardens, and the stepsisters and stepmother kind of separate from Elspeth, which leaves Elspeth able to run into Aunt Opal, and she tells Aunt Opal that Emory might have survived the infection without magic just like she did. But Opal doubts it. She tells Elspeth that parents do try to hide their children when they get the fever, but these kids always end up with obvious signs of magic. We also get a little Emory lore here where, according to Aunt Opal, he is way too young for Elspeth to be courting. How young is too young? Is this gonna be an age gap romance? Because so far all of the potential suitors are way older or way younger than Elspeth, and it's making me uncomfortable. And please, 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 no nightmare romance. Thanks. I hate this interlude. But thank God Iowyn pops up to save us from these painful romantic prospects. Elspeth immediately panics because she can see the pink light of what is obviously a maiden card. So Elspeth begs Iowyn not to use the maiden card, but she is really backhanded about it. Like, she's pointing out all of Iowyn's physical faults and implying those flaws are the only good things about her. And she also kind of assumes that Iowyn is just a little girl caught up in like big strong Uncle Terran's machinations. Iowyn doesn't take this well and asks Elspeth why she resents her so much. She accuses Elspeth of wanting to marry Prince Hoth. Is this true? Does Elspeth hate the Rowans unfairly? Is Elspeth's dislike of these Rowans proof of the Nightmare's influence on her? The Nightmare has been mean to people like Iowyn in Elspeth's head too, which makes me think he just is contrarian sometimes. And for me, this is sort of like the trap of telling, because there is a lot of information that Rachel Gillig has to establish for this story to work. And one way she does this is using Elspeth's and the Nightmare's internal conversations as exposition dumps for the world. But since Elspeth has stated she's afraid of the Nightmare, and we never have any outside proof of the Nightmare's claims, readers are left wondering if the Nightmare is lying to Elspeth or intentionally trying to mislead her. We also get some maiden card lore drop. Apparently using it makes the person flawlessly beautiful, and using it too often makes you become cold. And the Nightmare is not helping this situation. He says some rhyme stuff that kind of implies the Rowans gave Iowyn the maiden card so that they can use her as some kind of sacrifice. But Iowyn has had enough, and she gives Elspeth an ultimatum. Elspeth can choose to trust her. Let Iowyn make her own decisions. And Elspeth can't take this, so she just like runs away into the woods to cry. I really, really want this to lead to an Iowyn subplot where she has a plan of her own to take over Blunder and change this place for the better. But I am really not confident this book could pull that kind of twist off. So while Elspeth is in the woods, she runs into Raven. She sees the red glow of the Nightmare card in his pocket and is sort of panicked, leading us into chapter 6. The Highwayman meets the Hangman. Behind the mask, the Highwayman carries 2 eyes for seeing, 2 ears for hearing, and 1 tongue for lying. There is no second chance for the cut purse. The Highwayman meets the Hangman. And what the fuck is this really crappy poem doing in the front of this chapter? I think it's meant to hint that Raven is the Highwayman from chapter 2, but the guy comes out and says it like 1 sentence later, so why do I need this? I do wonder if the poem is possibly foreshadowing bad ends for Raven. Like maybe the poem is trying to tell us that Raven is a liar because the Highwaymen have 1 tongue for lying and Raven is the Highwayman. But I mean, Elspeth already doesn't trust Raven. So I do not know why this chapter needs to signal to readers that this is something to be on the lookout for. Anyways, Raven confirms that he was the Highwayman that ran into Elspeth, which means he knows about her magic, and Elspeth starts freaking out. The Nightmare wants to kill him, but Elspeth decides to get away and flee into the mist. Obviously, Raven chases. He says he's not going to hurt her, but obviously Elspeth doesn't believe that because he's captain of the Destroyers. It's his whole job to bring people with magic to justice. He uses his nightmare card to speak in her head, and that like causes her to stumble so he can catch up to her, and then tries to silence her because they can hear the king and his men coming back from the hunt. Elspeth's whole plan was to get the king and like her father's attention and beg for help, so she's struggling against Raven. But then like Nightmare intervenes on Raven's behalf, agreeing that like the Rowans are always the greater of two evils, so she should go with the flow this one time. And because her sleeve is ripped and Elspeth had called on the Nightmare to run away, he sees her arms are inky, which 100% confirms the use of magic if there had been doubt before now. To Elspeth's surprise, Raven tells her that there are other people out there who have magic. They're going to need someplace safe to talk about it further. And Elspeth really doesn't want to be around Providence cards right now, so she asks if they can return to the castle, avoiding the garden, because she doesn't want to deal with all that mess. And that's when Raven says, "How do you know where Providence cards are?" Leading us into the Chapter 7 epigraph. A charm is neither living nor dead. When an animal born of blunder dies of age, bury it deep in the soil. When the soil sprouts seed, unearth it. Take from the animal a piece no greater than the palm of your hand. Whether bone, hair, or feather, your charm is a safeguard in the mist. For the animals of blunder remain free from the spirit's snare. A charm is neither living nor dead. So this is kind of like a cool process on how to make a charm. It's a little bit of fun lore building, a little extra answers on things that I was personally curious about. It still doesn't really explain why the charm works or if this charm works at all. So even though I'm happy we're fleshing out the world, I like these little tidbits, I do still have to ask, what are we doing here? Elspeth has magic, so why does she need a charm? The worst has happened. And since we don't really know how Elspeth got the fever or anyone else, there's still no example of the mist harming anyone in it. But guys, if you remember, I was looking to see what happens to people who have the fever, and we have updates! The king doesn't just lock up sick kids in the dungeon, it turns out he burns them alive. Damn, that's dark. What happens to anyone attempting to hide these children? Also, we find out animals don't like Elspeth. Is that actually true, or is this small talk? Have animals always disliked Elspeth, or is this because of the nightmare influence? Am I supposed to like or empathize with this character trait? Because it's very odd. So Raven takes Elspeth to a random room and locks her in. Elspeth and the Nightmare discuss next steps. Nightmare believes that Raven's gonna test Elspeth's magic. Since the speed, strength, and ability to see Providence cards are all Nightmare's magic, maybe Elspeth doesn't have any powers except her tentative link to the Nightmare. But either way, the Nightmare thinks that Elspeth might still be able to hide all of her powers. She's already revealed she can see Providence cards, so perhaps she should just stick to that being the only thing she can do. But why? I get that wariness is a habit for Elspeth, but Raven did just reveal there were other people like her with magic. Wouldn't you want to learn more about them and their movement? And wouldn't honesty help this group and her as well, potentially? So Raven returns with Jesper and Philip Willow, a physician. He's apparently bound to obey Captain of the Dress Dryers, Raven. He's kind of cold for a doctor. He's more like detached and curious, like a creepy scientist than like a medical professional. And he doesn't seem to understand why he would terrify Elspeth. So then the three of them kind of interrogate her. Elspeth officially confirms she can see Providence cards, but that she can do nothing else. Raven does press her because obviously her ability to beat him up and outrun him was suspicious. But Elspeth sticks to her story and Raven doesn't push that hard. The other thing that she mentions is she hasn't experienced any cost to using her magic as of yet. The physician seems really skeptical on this point. So like, does Elspeth not pay for her magic because she's the special of this story? This is when Renlin enters the room. Obviously because he's a Rowan, Nightmare goes crazy. Apparently neither Elspeth nor the Nightmare likes that the king and his family pervert magic, making it something to control others and that people fear instead of something that inspires wonder. That's a pretty weird take, but sure, I guess. And also, apparently Renlin was one of the highwaymen who attacked Elspeth, and Elspeth gets big mad and demands that he leaves or she'll stop talking. Rolling us into the Chapter 8 epigraph. For the Black Horse card, the power and speed, the spirit wanted blood from my war horse, my steed. For the Golden Egg card, abundance and wealth, I bartered 2 years of my life's precious health. The prophet came next, the card of foresight. She wanted my fear, so I gave her my fright. When I asked her for courage, the white eagle card, I parted my skin, which left my hands scarred. So I begged for the maiden, for beauty I prayed. She asked for my hair, shorn with a blade. And I guess points for creepiness here. We learned the cost of the magic to make the Providence cards. Some of it sounds kind of creepy and terrible, but like losing your fear sounds awesome. And I still don't really understand why. Folks keep saying making these Providence cards was to give magic to the people. But so far these are very flashy powers with like little to no daily use. The lore is kind of cool, but I keep asking, does any of this matter? The descriptions in and of themselves, because they're stuck in this poetic structure, come off as very shallow. If Shepard paid for these cards, why is there still a price when you use them? Hasn't the price already been paid? The rhyme scheme here is just underwhelming and forced, but this rolls us into Elspeth getting tested. Raven comes in alone this time, and he has a bunch of different Providence cards, and he asks Elspeth to identify them blindfolded. He tries the standard trick of like a fake card, but Elspeth calls it out, saying she doesn't see anything. The sequence gives us a ton of Providence card lore. White eagles give courage, their backlash is fear. Obviously, Elspeth sees white. Black horse lets you master combat, whatever that means, and its backlash is weakness. Obviously, Elspeth sees black. Golden eagle leads to wealth, and its backlash is greed. It obviously shows up as gold. Maiden gives beauty and chills the user's heart. We already knew that was pink. Chalice turns into a liquid truth serum, and if you attempt to lie too much, the serum turns to poison. Well identifies enemies. Its backlash leads to betrayal by a friend, and Elspeth says that's blue. Iron Gate gives serenity, and its backlash steals years off your life. How you would know that, when that would come to pass, who knows. The mirror grants invisibility, and I think its backlash is seeing ghosts. The prophet gives you foresight, and overuse makes you unable to impact that vision you saw. Scythe allows one to control another person, and its backlash is to cause the user pain. And the Twin Alders is said to let its users commune with Spirit of the Woods, but no one knows because no one's really seen that card, and likewise we have no idea what its backlash is. So then Elspeth bargains with Raven. She says she will help them collect all of the Providence cards, but in return they need to leave her family alone. And Raven has to promise never use the Nightmare card on her, because Elspeth fears that continued use of the Nightmare card would allow Raven to see that the nightmare is actually in her head talking to her, which is a super suspicious request. Do we actually think the Nightmare card allows its user to see all of Elspeth's mind, including that there's a foreign entity in there? Rolling me into the Chapter 9 epigraph. There must be touch, there must be intention. Tap a Providence card thrice to command its magic. Tap it thrice more, and its magic will cease. Guard it in your cloak, your house. But be wary, magic knows no loyalty. Should someone else touch the card, its magic shall be theirs to command. There must be touch, there must be intention. So at this point, I have to wonder if the epigraphs are optimized for second screen viewing. Full of repetition and info we already knew. The only way this pays off is if we find a way to break the laws of magic. And I kind of doubt we're going to do that here in Chapter 9. So Raven releases Elspeth. She returns to her family's room and gets ready for the night's feast. Stepsisters are kind of curious, and her stepmother is vaguely disapproving. And Elspeth asks her stepsisters if they knew that Iowan had a maiden card, which, like, way to respect other people's privacy. For one who's so guarded with her own personal secrets, she is like super free giving gossip to everyone with other people's potential secrets. So Elspeth and her family head down to the feast, and they're announced, which is when Renlin greets them. He takes interest in Elspeth, asks to escort her into the ball. Fun Renlin fact, he also goes by Elm, and he is really upset that Raven and her were alone in a room for so long together. He questions how useful Elspeth's magic truly is, and Elspeth also gets formally introduced to Prince Hoth here. Renlin wants to distance Elspeth from Hoth almost as much as Elspeth seems to want to get away from that guy. Does this indicate an evil Hoth or a covetous Renlin? I don't know. Seems very weird that he's part of the revolution though. So we finally get a little peek peek into why Elspeth doesn't like Prince Hoth. Apparently, he uses his scythe card on criminals to force them to march to their death in the forest, and he'll like call a whole crowd to watch. Considering we find out that children who have the fever are burned alive, I'm not sure ending up wandering out in the forest is worse. But Elspeth manages to break away from both Hoth and Renlelm, and she runs into her Aunt Opal, who is crying, and she admits that her husband, Uncle Terran, had some plans and machinization she was not aware of, and she is upset about it. She's about to tell Elspeth exactly what's going on when she realizes her two younger sons are causing mischief and runs off to go corral them. And like, remember that Alex dude? He pops up again and wants to sit with Elspeth and is a little bit more pushy this time than he was last time, and Elspeth just cannot handle him, so she uses Raven as an excuse and like goes to sit next to him. Alex is obviously hurt. I do wonder if that's gonna matter at all, but we don't have time for that right now because Prince Hoth comes out and presents the nightmare card Uncle Tern just gave them. As a reward, he is now engaged to Iwin, and Iwin comes out on stage and she's using the maiden card. Rolling me into chapter 10. Weary I'd grown, so I needed the well. She asked for a chamber, a place she might dwell. To reclaim my good self, I forged the iron gate. The cost was my armor, my golden breastplate. From the scythe I wanted power, and her price was quite steep. I gave her my rest, she claimed all my sleep. The mirror was next, to be invisible, unseen. She wanted old bones, so I gave her my queens. But it felt incomplete, my collection yet whole, and so, for the nightmare, I bartered my soul. Thanks, I guess. The sacrifices for the latter half of the cards do become more intense, forcing me again to wonder if these cards are worth the cost. And by the end of the poem, I'm really disgusted by Shepherd King. It seems to me like he might have earned his suffering. Format-wise, I have to wonder why a series of poems that obviously started in chapter 8 come in chapter 10. Like, why did we have an interlude with that other randomness in chapter 9? And even though this poem feels a little bit more engaging, I still don't really know why this information matters or what I'm supposed to do with it. It does seem to me like the nightmare is Shepherd King, or at least he is Shepherd King's soul, since that's what he bartered to make this card. But back to the actual story, everything's unraveling right now. Raven stiffens when he sees the nightmare card on display, and Elspeth realizes that he is surprised the king has a nightmare card, which means the nightmare card that Raven has, the king doesn't know about, which makes Elspeth upset that there's all this cloak and dagger nonsense going on. She demands a full accounting of the truth, which Raven can't tell her without like the rebellion's full approval, so he calls the council together. And they're gonna decide if Elspeth is trustworthy or not to know the full truth. While heading over to meet the team, we get a little Emory lore, where Raven confirms that he is sick with the fever and has magic and is degenerating. The only reason he's still alive is because he's so closely related to the king, and that's also why he's been moved to the palace so they can control him. Raven and Elspeth are going to head to the meeting, and Raven offers her the mayor card so that she can be invisible on the walk over. She makes up a nonsense reason to refuse it. Raven uses the mayor card instead. Apparently, Elspeth believes her actual power is absorbing the power of the cards, and she doesn't accidentally want to absorb the mayor card's power too. They all arrive at their destination. Everyone from Elspeth's original interrogation squad is there, and there is also Raven's parents, Fenrir and Morietta. Rolling me into chapter 11 epigraph, The Scythe. Be wary the red, be wary the blade. Be wary the pain, for a price will be paid. Command what you can, death waits for no man. Be wary the pain, for a price will be paid. This one is so dumb and repetitive. Of all the Providence cards, I know the most about the Scythe, and the poem doesn't give me any new information. It really hammers home that the second line and the last line are the same line. It's making me feel like the existence of these epigraphs, the descriptions of these cards, is a forced, self-imposed structure that the author set up for themselves and has to continue, whether useful or not. But it is time for Elspeth's real test in front of this council. She's given the choice of undergoing a test via 3 cards, either the Nightmare, the Chalice, or the Scythe. So that's going to be reading her thoughts, taking Truth Serum, or the Scythe forcing her to answer questions. Obviously, the Nightmare card is out, and one wrong question from the Chalice card and Elspeth has spilled all the beans. So despite Elspeth's fear of being physically overpowered and losing her autonomy, she ends up choosing the Scythe card. So Renla makes like a big show of how the Scythe card works on Elspeth, where she's like happy to obey orders and will do stupid shit because he said so. But the flaws of ordering someone to tell the truth sort of become apparent to readers right away. And one kind of wonders why this card was even one of the options for her. And fun Nightmare fact here, but he can't be controlled by like any of the Providence cards. So when he and Elspeth eventually swap out, there's no impact from the Scythe card anymore at all. But why? Do the Providence cards require a physical body to take effect and the Nightmare is a spirit? Are there any repercussions for Elspeth surrendering her body to the Nightmare repetitively? And what counterbalance will there be for this level of plot armor where anytime Elspeth might be in danger from the Providence card, she just swaps Nightmare in? So here's the conspiracy going on. To cure the mist, the king plans to sacrifice Fenrir and Morietta's son, Emory. The group's goal is to cure the mist before then and save Emory's life by sacrificing somebody else. If both the king and the rebellion intend to cure the mist, what's really the difference to Elspeth? And who is the rebellion going to sacrifice in Emory's place? Will siding with this rebellion actually put Elspeth on the chopping block to be the person sacrificed? So Elspeth also has some weird, icky insta-love attraction to Raven, and she's sharing with us how he's kind of too old for her. How old is too old, Elspeth? Can we please just go back to the Elspeth-Alex relationship? Thank you so much, book. I hate these age gaps. So Elspeth agrees to help the Resistance, and the Resistance reveals that they're almost got a complete deck. All they need is the Iron Gate, the Well card, and the Twin Alders. Leading me into Chapter 12 epigraph, the Prophet. Be wary the grey, be wary the sight. Be wary the visions that come in the night. You'll lose all your power. You'll weep, plea, and cower. Be wary the visions that come in the night. This poem is dumb and means nothing. It literally gave me no information. And I don't believe it even understands what's creepy about the Prophet card. So like, for example, what is scary about foreknowledge is its inevitability. Like, look at Oedipus. His father Laius attempts to avoid a prophecy where his son is going to grow up to kill him and marry his mother by ordering his son killed. But unfortunately for him, the guy takes pity on the child. That kid gets adopted by a neighboring realm. The very act of trying to thwart that prophecy leads into that chain of events where Oedipus comes back as a grown man, slays his dad, and marries his mom. The whole thing that makes a prophecy card of value is whatever you see cannot be changed. And in fact, attempting to change anything actually makes the prophecy come to fruition. If you can see a vision of the future and change it, then you can really see a vision of the future. So for me, this poem about the prophecy reveals nothing, fails at setting a tone, and I have to assume is only here to maintain the chapter by chapter epigraph structure. So apparently Morietta has a prophecy card and she used it to have a vision where she sees a stranger with a shadow that could carry all 13 of the cards. And finding this person is what keeps Emory alive, which is why Raven and Renlem were in the forest looking for the right person. Rolling me into my predictions that Elspeth is the person who can carry all 13 of the cards. The shadow next to her is clearly the Nightmare. And now we've graduated into a chosen one style story. Now the rebellion is trying to find a way to keep Elspeth close to them, so they set up a fake courting situation between Raven and her so that she can stay at their home, basically so that Raven has more opportunity to court her during his busy work schedule. But of course, secretly she'll just be more available to help them hunt down the different Providence cards. And I see what you're doing, book. Here you are setting up the fake marriage forced proximity romance. I am really though personally worried about the age gap that we mentioned, where apparently Raven is much older than Elspeth. I need to know how much older. I'm also concerned about how complicit Moriette and Fenrir seem to be in setting the two of them up, because it does seem like a side quest for Jesper, Moriette, and Fenrir to actually find Raven a girlfriend. After this meeting, Raven takes Elspeth to see Emory. He is the why behind this entire rebellion. If this guy wasn't sick and dying, we wouldn't be doing this. Raven reveals Emory is very close to death death, and that's why the king is going to have to either use him as a sacrifice this winter solstice, or Emory's probably going to die before the next opportunity arises. But when they get to Emory's room, he's gone, rolling us into that chapter 13 epigraph. Degeneration falls like leaves from a branch, swift or slow and steady. The infection grants great magic. Degeneration is the cost of such a gift. For many, the payment is their own sanity. For others, their lives. Degeneration falls like leaves from a branch. So I don't hate this epigraph. On one side, it is repetitive. It doesn't really share any new sense of horror or urgency for me. But there is a question of what exactly Elspeth's magic is costing her. And this sort of continues to make the wheels churn and make us wonder more about her condition and how far along she is, what she's losing. And it prompts us to ask questions like, is she not degenerating because she's not using magic? Is there a tragedy looming? Is she just the specialist of girls? So maybe this particular epigraph is good. We get a huge Raven lore dump in this particular chapter. We find out he also had the fever and that he has magic. Like Elspeth, it seems like he absorbs the power of the Providence cards. Not all, just arbitrarily some of them. And he can't use the cards he absorbs, he just takes in their power. Which means that Raven cannot absorb the Nightmare card. Which makes me wonder, is Raven's cost for his magic that he can only use some of the Providence cards? Is Raven and Elsa's power the same and they can only absorb the cards the other one cannot? Can Raven only not absorb the Nightmare card because Elspeth already has the soul or whatever? Were both of them eligible? Rolling me into chapter 14 epigraph. For the last Providence card, I wanted her close, to answer my call when I needed her most. But she guarded her secrets like a dragon its gold, saying nothing of the price our bargain would hold. But long had I suffered, and long had I bled. I'll pay any cost for the 12th card, I said. The salt stung my nose, and her spite filled the air. I woke in the chamber, the twin alders card there. And so, my dear kingdom, my blunder, my land, this card falls to you, paid by my hand. For her price it was final, our bartering done. I created 12 cards, but I cannot use one. So this is getting a little interesting to me. Is the final Twin Alders card really meant to summon the spirit of the woods? Why would she agree to make such a thing? And is the price immunity to magic, like the Nightmare happens to be? Or is Shepherd King punished by making cards he can no longer use? So we get an info dump about Raven and his power situation. It turns out the cards lose power when he holds them and they regain it as soon as he drops them. He cannot use the White Eagle, the Chalice, or the Sight, and none of these cards affect him in return. He can use the Nightmare, the Mara, and maybe the Twin Alders. I can't help but notice this is only 6 of the 12 cards. What about the others? So because this is a romantasy, Raven and Elspeth take time out to dance. It's a fake courting, insta-love romance. They have to make a good show of it if anyone's gonna believe them. And also, we have to have a moment where the two of them are forced to be in close proximity so there can be chemistry building. But after we complete our obligatory sexual tension scene and have empathy unlocked, it's time to go look for Emory again. When we finally catch up to them, he gives a cryptic Nightmare warning, but it's really unclear whether he's talking about Nightmare the card or Nightmare the disembodied voice in Elspeth's head. Then he coughs up blood and passes out, which sort of re-emphasizes how close he is to death. And that's the end of part 1. So let's talk about my thoughts so far. It has been a lot of world building and exposition. I have over 250 slides in this presentation, and most of them are here explaining the world of Blunder, the magic, and basic mechanics. Very little time is spent about the characters inhabiting this world or exactly what they're doing, and that's because the characters are not doing that much and not a lot of time's passing. Some exposition via conversation is quite nice. It helps give the characters a sense of personality. We get to see how people feel and not just like this base level of information or knowledge. But it is a lot, and it really is going to need to ramp up some in part 2 to hold my attention. With the characters, there's little to say about any one individual. There's too many of them, and a lot of them currently feel quite pointless. Like, why does Elseth have twin stepsisters? Couldn't she just have one of them unless we're intentionally making a Cinderella reference? Why does Eowyn have 2 brothers or even 1 brother at all? Why name drop Elspeth's father, Stuart, or the Blade Master at the uncle's home? And does Alex actually have a purpose in this story? Will Jesper have a role beyond a token female warrior? There's already so much to keep track of. If these characters have no purpose, it's just one more thing bogging the narrative down, and I would really advocate for like slimming it up. As far as our main cast goes, they're about as deep as a piece of paper. Elspeth is wary. She makes a lot of assertions about her world, but she doesn't give a lot of examples and we don't get to observe anything definite. And given her whole world view is proven to be wrong or at least highly inaccurate when Raven reveals there's quite a few people bopping around with magic, I don't know if we can really take her word for almost anything. And then talking about Elspeth and the nightmare, I think we're supposed to conclude that the nightmare is influencing Elspeth's thoughts and feelings, but we don't know what Elspeth thought before the nightmare existed. And we haven't really gotten anything that proves the nightmare right or wrong, so we don't know if he's leading her astray or telling some home truths or doing something entirely different. Nor have we really gotten to see Elspeth struggle between maintaining her own personal perspective while the nightmare tries to like apply force on a differing view. I really don't know what, if anything, I'm supposed to do with this element right now. Elspeth and Ione are meant to be foils in this story, but we really don't get enough interaction between the two of them for me to draw much of anything but from it. There would be more opportunity to create foil connectivity if Ione and Hoth were a couple and then we had Elseth and Renlim on the other side, but I think we're gonna do Elseth and Raven, so that sort of messes up that potential element of comparison. So now I'm just like casting a wide net out there to see what happens, and I think the best comparisons I can make are between Elspeth, Emory, and Raven, because all 3 of them have this fever, and their parents were able to spare them from like a horrible death. All of them have ended up with magic. Elspeth and Raven's magic specifically seems to affect the Providence cards. And as of right now, Elspeth and Raven don't seem to pay a price for magic, or the price they pay is like very nominal. And if we're looking at differences between the 3, Emory is suffering greatly from his use of magic. Emory and Raven weren't rejected by their parents when they had the fever or when they gained magic, and in fact the only reason Emory isn't living with his parents is at the king's demand. And it does currently seem like Elseth's dad might have rejected her after she got sick. Elseth wants to live in anonymity, while it seems like Raven's driving goal has been to cure the land of magic and mist. And there's an odd age gap between Emory, Elseth, and Raven, where Emory is much younger than Elseth, Elseth is much younger than Raven. Talking about the secrets of Shepherd King, at this point in time it seems like either the Nightmare or possibly Raven might be connected or actually be Shepherd King. Obviously the Nightmare has this thing where he is like a disembodied voice, possibly the soul Shepherd King gave up to make the Nightmare cards, which sort of makes him seem like the more likely bet between the two. But Raven also seems to echo some of Shepherd King's essence, because the way Shepherd King couldn't interact with all of the Providence cards, Raven is not able to interact with some of them. And also like some of Shepherd King's larger goals to like protect Blunder or make things easier for the people fall in line with the actions that Raven is currently taking. Plot-wise, the first 38% of this book happens over 4 days. And 2 of those days are somehow equinox. Like, I hate harping on this, but equinox is a single day celebration. It marks when there is the same amount of daylight to nighttime. And it makes me very confused as to why equinox is a couple day long celebration. My point here is like the timing and the pacings of things seems very haphazard and lazy, poorly thought out at best. Why exactly was it that night that Raven and Renlim were out there waiting as highwaymen? Why is this equinox the one that Taryn wants to marry Iowyn off at? It just feels so arbitrary, taking too long, doing too little. Let's do a quick epigraph check. Out of 14 chapters, I found 4 of these epigraphs wins, 4 of them are maybes, depending on what we get going forward, and 6 of them are fails. So I'm sticking to my guns that epigraphs are kind of a crapshoot, but I would love for my mind to be changed by the end of this book. Also, I don't 100% understand this rebellion. Nightmare's cryptic warnings have been that the Rowans don't actually want to get rid of the myths and cure Blunder, but the Resistance' only complaint about Rowan so far seems to be that they're gonna sacrifice Emory to make this happen. As I said, both sides are working for the same goal. There's no effective difference for Elspeth. That said, I'm still having a lot of fun. The Providence cards as a magical system is really engaging. I kind of think I know what the Nightmare is and his role in the story, but I still really want to read it. I want to know more about the Spirit of the Woods. I want to get my hands on the Twin Alders card and find out what it does. Also, I still am really hoping that Iowan has some kind of larger plan, get back a Prince Hoth sort of scheme, or manipulate him in some way. And that's going to be all of my first impressions, observations, plot, and character building elements for One Dark Window Part 1, The Cards. If you got all the way to the end of this video, leave me a card emoji in those comments down below, and let me know if you want to see a Part 2 breakdown of One Dark Window where we further discuss the plot, the characters, the world building of this book. And as always, keep reading.